What's up guys, welcome to Film and TV Reviews. Today I'm reviewing Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, the second Fantastic Beasts film. This time Grindelwald has escaped custody and Newt Scamander is sent to try and capture him. And there's a bunch of other stuff going on in this film because this is a jam-packed film. So what did I think of it? Well, on the whole, I thought it was just okay. I think it's a little better than the first one. It is a bit more exciting, a bit more interesting than the first one, but it does have some really big problems. The film starts and ends with cool action sequences. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the end just yet, I will go into spoilers later, but these really do a good job of helping bring up the excitement levels. Sadly, everything in the middle is just a little bit bland and boring. And the main storyline with Grindelwald and Newt Scamander trying to hunt him down and linking into Dumbledore, that's fine. Everything else, however, just isn't. And I'll get into that why that is in a little bit. But it's usually to do with the characters associated with their stories. The big problem with this film is that it is the second chapter in what is going to be a 5-chapter franchise. And it really does feel like it's just setting things up for future films. It doesn't feel like it's a standalone, it doesn't feel like it's going to be remembered in the long run. One of the film's big problems is the way in which it presents backstory and the way in which it develops its characters. J.K. Rowling wrote this film, and J.K. Rowling, of course, is best known for her novels. You can totally tell this would have worked really well as a novel because you could just put it down all on the page. Sadly, in film, you can't do that. You've got to express this stuff differently. It's got to be visual, it's got to be auditory. And JK's kind of failed here because there's a huge scene towards the end of the film when all the characters are meant to be in a hurry, they're meant to be panicking, trying to stop Grindelwald. They all converge, and then next thing you know, everyone's just slowing down and they're having this huge conversation detailing how they're all related, what their backstory is. It feels really forced, it's really exposition heavy, and this happens a few times throughout the film where the characters just kind of stop what they're doing and explain things to you. And yeah, it's just not great. And to top it all off, the characters aren't that interesting, their stories aren't that interesting. But we'll go into that again later on. And in terms of the story, a lot of the problems could probably be fixed if you just got rid of some of the storylines. A lot of the storylines don't need to be there. They certainly don't need to be as long as they are, or as detailed as they are. There's the whole storyline with Queenie and Jacob, that kind of feels forced in. Queenie and Jacob probably didn't actually have to be in this film at all. And there are other characters like Nagini from the Harry Potter movies, who's the snake in the Harry Potter movies. She's in this film for no reason at all, really. I don't think she has a single line of dialogue. Well, actually, she probably has one line of dialogue, and even then, she doesn't do anything in the film. And she's not the only one. There are other characters here as well who are just kind of there, going with the flow, following the action, not really contributing much at all. So since I've already kind of start talking about the characters, let's move on about the characters. The characters are boring. They're not interesting at all. And that's because they don't have the detailed backstory that the characters from the Harry Potter books have. A lot of these are exclusive to this film. The villain, Grindelwald, he plays a central role in this movie, as you'd expect by the title. The problem with Grindelwald, though, is that he's really just a one-note stereotypical mustache-twirling villain. Well, maybe not mustache twirling because he's way calmer and more collected than you might expect from him. And he's played by Johnny Depp. That's going to be controversial in itself. So I think they've just went too far with the way he looks, giving him a weird eye and blonde hair. It looks like a villain. If you ask someone to draw an evil wizard, that's probably something they'd come up with. And it doesn't look all that creative. It just looks a bit cheesy and silly, to be honest. And Johnny Depp's performance, the performance is actually fine. It's just what he's made to do. Nothing original about this character at all, I don't think. And I think in future films it might benefit a bit more by getting more interaction between him and Dumbledore, because any Harry Potter fan knows that's where all the juicy material is with that character. One of the problems I had with the first Fantastic Beasts film was Newt Scamander, played by Eddie Redmayne. Eddie Redmayne, a good actor, can't fault his acting, and even in his performance here, good acting. The problem is the character I don't think it's a good lead character for a film. I think he'd make a great side character, but he's not believable as like this big heroic, all-powerful wizard. And they don't quite establish why he of all people has to be the one to go after Grindelwald, why he's the one that has to do this. Because it seems he's nothing all that special when it comes to magic. Yeah, he knows these animals, he knows all these fantastical beasts and how to handle them, but when it comes to actual magic with a wand, he's nothing to talk about. So why send him after Grindelwald? It doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of people are going to struggle relating to Newt because he does. I don't want to say too much about his character, but because it's a lot of assumptions, it hasn't been said. But he seems to be somewhat autistic, maybe. Some He's not quite what you would call normal, let's say. And that's a bad way of phrasing it, but it's the best way I can think of off the top of my head. Jude Law plays Dumbledore. Fine, he's good as Dumbledore. I can't complain about him, but he's just not in the film enough. In fact, he spends the entirety of the film wandering around in the shadows, basically just instructing people. And it makes sense for this film, but it is disappointing. They made a big deal about him being in it, and he doesn't do much, if anything. Dumbledore's always been presented as this big, all-powerful wizard. He's meant to be the most powerful, best wizard there's ever been, really. And the films and the books often fail to really show that. So I'm hoping that's something this franchise eventually gets to. So the film constantly wants us to care about the characters. The storylines involving Zoe Kravitz's character and Credence, for example, J.K. Rowling clearly wants us to feel emotional about these characters. It wants us to find these characters to be compelling, but they're just not, because they don't have a backstory. We don't know anything about them. Hell, the whole thing about Credence is that we don't know anything about him, and yet we're still supposed to relate to him, we're still supposed to like him and care about him, especially when things happen towards the end, which I'll get into later. And yeah, the whole problem here is that this would have worked way better as a novel, where JK could have wrote out the backstory, told us all this stuff, whereas in the film, she can't do that, so it just comes off as a little flat. And I've already touched on this with the stories, there's too many characters in the film as well. So, for example, you get the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel, I believe his name is. He shows up. Why? I don't know. I don't have a clue why he's in this film. Maybe he'll show up again in future films. Maybe he's going to be of more importance there. But he shows up twice in this film, and I think it's suggested that he does something, but I don't really know what it is, except for telling people to get in a circle. And yeah, but he's not the only character that probably shouldn't have been here. So in terms of production, this is kind of where the film shines. Great sets, like really, really cool, brilliant sets, particularly in the French Ministry of Magic and the British Ministry of Magic. They really pop in colour, really detailed, really intricate, very well imaginative sets. There's good action in the film, but there's not a lot of action. It's only really at the beginning and towards the end. The beginning scene is probably the best scene in the whole film, to be honest, where Grindelwald is escaping from prison. The CGI is good. I think some of the monsters and creatures and beasts are questionable at times, because that is harder to do CGI wise. Maybe there's a little too much of it. And in relation to this, the depictions of magic, I had a problem with the depictions of magic here. In the Harry Potter films, the depictions of magic were always somewhat grounded. Yeah, it's a bit bizarre and fantastical at times, but it was believable. Here, though, they're doing these huge spells that are literally encompassing huge streets and districts of Paris. There's one moment where Grindelwald's sending a message to all of his followers by draping essentially black curtains across entire buildings, and yet nobody seems to notice this. That's an odd thing. And also, all these big time spells never seen or heard before in the Harry Potter franchise. So how come the wizards here are doing these things, and yet in Harry Potter, which is set in the 90s, nothing like that is possible? It's just a bit odd, I think. And ultimately, the big problem with this film and with the first Fantastic Beasts film is that, unlike the Harry Potter films, it just lacks the charm and character of those films. There was something about going to Hogwarts, being immersed in this magical world, having the focus be on children, and younger adults that was just so good. And by focusing on adults here, it doesn't quite work. But Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, that's all I gotta say about it in non-spoilers. I thought it was okay at best. I do think it's better than the first film. I think it's more interesting and exciting than the first film. But if you're a huge Harry Potter fan, you might find this disappointing. But I'm going to go into spoilers. If you haven't seen the film, come back later, watch the rest of this. But in the meantime, subscribe to my channel. I'd appreciate that. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you think of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. And follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @the_Grant Burton. But full spoilers now. So Grindelwald. He's meant to be this great wizard. I totally get that. The problem is he's not very original. When you really think about it, he's a lot like Voldemort. His plan is a lot like Voldemort. Yeah, he's going about it a different way, and he's not quite as evil as Voldemort, but the similarities are there, and that's a problem. It's disappointing. It could have come up with something a bit more original. If you've read the Harry Potter books, it's stated that Dumbledore's the one to bring an end to Grindelwald, because he was the only one capable of doing it. Well, at the end of this film, it's revealed that Credence is a Dumbledore. Now, I've only read the Harry Potter books once. I can't remember. Is it actually stated that Albus Dumbledore brought an end to Grindelwald? If it just says Dumbledore, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of this franchise it's actually Credence that ends Grindelwald. Or at the very least, Albus just takes the credit for it. Maybe that's getting into spoilers, I don't know, but that's my prediction for the future of the franchise. And I feel like I'm comparing this a lot to the Harry Potter films because it is, technically speaking, part of the Harry Potter film franchise. But the problem is the way in which it tries to tie in to the Harry Potter franchise. A lot of the times it just feels forced, it feels unnecessary. I've talked about Nagini, she doesn't have to be here. You've got Leta Lestrange in here, or Leta Lestrange, related to a character in the Harry Potter franchise. No reason for her to be here. And, of course, you've got Professor McGonagall showing up here. Completely breaking canon because, well, she's a little older than we all thought, but no reason for her to pop up here either. It just constantly feels like they're trying to relate to something that's not necessary. One of the things the film does pretty poorly, I think, is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is when you're hinting at something to come, and you're establishing something early on that's then going to be relevant later. And it does this with Grindelwald and Dumbledore's pact or vow or whatever it is, when they basically promise not to compete against each other. And it's so clear that by the end of the film, that's going to be a thing, and yep, it is a thing. And it's clearly going to be the whole goal of the next film, trying to abolish this pact or vow between Dumbledore and Grindelwald so that they can eventually face each other. So, yeah, we know what the next film's probably going to be about because of that. And it just feels a little forced. It's not very subtle at all. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe if it was any more subtle, maybe we wouldn't have spotted it. I don't know. So I mentioned earlier about some of the magic, how it's a little over the top, a little grander than in the Harry Potter films and books. Well, in relation to this, how do muggles, people who don't know magic, not know about all these wizards? Like I said, Grindelwald literally does magic that encompasses huge areas and streets and locations. How does no one see this? How does no one question this? It's just a little odd and peculiar to me. I know they do have these little parts of the world where they can go in and walk through walls, and then all of a sudden they're in like this magical like void that's hidden from muggles, but it's never clearly stated how much of this is actually taking place in these magical locations or not. So, yeah. I don't know if this is breaking canon or not, or if it's a big thing or not. So, one of the big controversies about the marketing of this film is that it was said that Grindelwald and Dumbledore won't be actively in love with each other in this film. And it is hinted at in this film. It's hinted at that they have a romantic relationship, and J.K. Rowling has stated that they do have a romantic relationship. So the problem is that in this film, they never sound, act, or behave like they love each other. It's always just like, oh, they're great mates. they never go into great detail about it. There is a flashback where they are doing the pact and so on, which does delve into that. But when it's actually Jude Law and Johnny Depp playing the roles, it just doesn't happen. It also doesn't help that they never share the screen together. But that's kind of all I've got to say about Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. It was okay. Follow me on Twitter, yada yada yada. Subscribe to my channel, I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.